Paul Fugate was a veteran park ranger at Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. On Sunday, January 13th, 1980, the 41-year-old Fugate was on duty at the monument's visitor center when he stepped outside to hike a nearby trail. He told a colleague he was going to do a trail and left wearing his National Park Service uniform, including his ranger badge and a green jacket, expecting to be back soon. However, Paul never returned from this routine patrol. By nightfall, concern began to grow extremely rapidly. A seasonal park employee staying at Paul's residence became alarmed when he did not come home after dark and alerted the park superintendent. That evening, the superintendent and two others searched nearby trails with flashlights, calling out Paul's name in the cold canyon air, but found no trace of him. The following morning, a full-scale search was launched. On January 14th, 1980, the Cochise County Sheriff's Office organized a search and rescue operation, soon joined by National Park Service personnel and other agencies. Over the next 2 weeks, an intensive search effort scoured Chiricahua's rugged terrain. Teams of rangers and volunteers, eventually numbering over 20 people and a search dog, combed the trails and canyons, assisted by a National Guard helicopter overhead. Would-be rescuers rappelled into steep rocky crevices and fanned out in a line to inspect every ravine and gully within at least a half-mile radius of the visitor center. Despite these exhaustive efforts, not a single piece of evidence was found. One set of footprints initially raised hope until searchers realized the prints belonged to one of their own team members. Aside from that, the search turned up nothing. No clothing, no equipment, and no sign of Paul Fugate. After roughly 2 weeks, the official ground search was scaled back, with Paul still missing. In the months and years following his disappearance, volunteer search parties occasionally combed the backcountry beyond the initial grid, checking remote trails and even old mine shafts. Tips and purported sightings of the missing ranger trickled in from around the country, but none led to a breakthrough. In one instance, a man spotted in New Mexico turned out to be a different individual, and a report of someone resembling Paul in the Florida Keys also proved false. Despite the Fugate family's persistence, no physical evidence of Paul Fugate has ever been recovered. To this day, he remains the only National Park Service ranger to vanish without a trace and never be found. From the outset, law enforcement suspected that Fugate's disappearance involved foul play. After the fruitless initial search, authorities began treating the case as a possible crime rather than a lost hiker incident. A formal missing person investigation was opened in 1980 and has technically remained open ever since. Early on, a notable lead emerged. About 5 days after Paul went missing, a park volunteer named Richard Horton recalled a disturbing sight from the day of January 13th. Horton and his wife had been driving in the area when they passed a pickup truck speeding away from the scene. Personally, I find it weird that this memory took 5 days to resurface, but hey, that's just me, and maybe I'm too skeptical. In the brief glimpse, Horton believed he may have seen Paul Fugate slumped between two men in the truck's cab traveling at high speed. Investigators found this account compelling enough that at the end of January 1980, they arranged for Horton to undergo hypnosis to dredge up details of the memory. Under hypnosis, Horton described the vehicle as a dark green pickup with a camper shell. He stated that the driver was a bearded man in his 30s, wearing a plaid shirt, and a second man in the truck was wearing a green jacket resembling the Park Service coat Fugate had. Horton recalled that Paul looked sad and dejected, as if he were semi-conscious or being held against his will. There were even reports from other park staff around that time of skid marks on a dirt road near the faraway ranch area and potential signs of a scuffle in the dirt. This lent some credence to the abduction theory, but despite these leads, no suspects were identified. If Paul had indeed been kidnapped or slain on January 13th, The perpetrators had a head start before investigators honed in on that scenario. Law enforcement pursued various tips and theories in the ensuing months, but progress was elusive. In July 1983, the Cochise County Sheriff's Office publicly stated that new information had led them to conclude Paul had been slain. They made an official announcement that the arrest of more than one person was imminent. This clearly raised hopes that the mystery was on the verge of being solved. However, no arrests were ever made in connection with the case, and the leads underlying that 1983 announcement apparently ultimately went cold. Given that the investigation is still open, the true nature of this announcement and why it never led to an arrest remains unknown. However, before this 1983 announcement, there was a slight hiccup in the case. Since he was missing in the line of duty, Paul's wife, Dodie Fugate, continued to be paid his salary, a source of apparent contention in the Park Service. In early 1981, Howard Chapman, the Park Service's Western Regional Director, reviewed the case and made a harsh determination. He declared that Paul Fugate had likely voluntarily abandoned his position. This bureaucratic ruling treated the disappearance not as an on-duty tragedy, but as an apparent desertion. The Park Service formally fired Paul retroactively for being absent without leave, halted the salary payments to his wife, and even demanded that she return the wages paid. And to add insult to injury, the Park Service wanted significant interest payments on everything that had been previously paid out. This seems to be an incredibly harsh and bizarre stance to have taken given the circumstances of the case. But as you'll see in a couple minutes, Paul may not have been liked by the higher-ups. After an outcry, the service agreed not to force an immediate repayment, but instead planned to recoup that sum from Fugate's federal retirement account. Dodie Fugate was informed she had no right to appeal this decision, because in a Kafkaesque twist, any appeal needed to be filed personally by the employee himself within 20 days. This was an impossible condition given that Paul was of course missing. Dodie fought back, seeking support from officials and lawmakers. The case caught the attention of Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater's office, and his office applied pressure on the Park Service to reconsider its stance. In 1986, 6 years after Paul's disappearance, the Park Service finally revisited the case in depth. After examining every report, witness statement, and search record, the 1986 review team concluded there was no evidence that Paul Fugate had staged his own disappearance. Further, they found no evidence that he was still somewhere out there, alive and living his best life. In the absence of definitive answers, several theories have emerged about what happened to Paul Fugate. Investigators and those who knew Fugate agree on one point: foul play is the most likely explanation. Both the evidence and the broader context suggest that Paul probably encountered dangerous individuals on his hike and met with violence. The Chiricahua National Monument is not only remote and mountainous, but also lies in Cochise County, about 80 miles north of the Mexican border. In 1980, the region was beginning to see increased activity from substance traffickers using routes through the Chiricahua Corridor. This is an area historically used by smugglers moving all manner of illicit cargo northward. Paul had gone hiking in the Faraway Ranch section of the monument, which was, and remains, a relatively secluded area. In fact, Faraway Ranch and the surrounding terrain would later gain notoriety as a haven for smuggling. Decades after Fugate's disappearance, in 2014, a park employee was violently assaulted at Faraway by cartel affiliates, underscoring the real dangers present in that area. Given this context, a prevalent theory is that Paul accidentally stumbled upon smugglers or other criminals on January 13, 1980, after which he was permanently silenced. Another theory, considered early on but largely discredited by the evidence, is that Paul Fugate intentionally disappeared of his own free will. In the initial stages of the investigation, some officials posited that Fugate might have become disillusioned with his job or personal life and chosen to walk away forever. This idea was partly fueled by Fugate's personality and history. He was known as a bit of a nonconformist within the Park Service, famously one of the first rangers to defy the agency's strict grooming standards. Years before, he had even been briefly fired in 1970 for not cutting his hair, only winning back his position after a legal battle that lasted until 1976. Because of this maverick streak, some wondered in 1980 if Paul had grown tired of the Park Service's rules or of other aspects of his life. There was talk of marital strain and even speculation that Paul might have secretly followed an allegedly pregnant girlfriend to another city. However, no credible evidence ever supported the notion that Fugate disappeared deliberately. In fact, tangible evidence strongly contradicts it. When authorities searched Fugate's home, they found that he had left behind virtually everything important to him. He left his wallet, around $300 in cash, an extensive and valuable weapon collection, high-end camera equipment, and even an antique truck he was in the process of restoring. Nothing was missing except Paul himself, a fact that implies he had fully expected to return. While it's impossible to completely rule out that Fugate could have vanished by choice, the consensus today is that this theory is highly implausible given the circumstances. Others have speculated that he may have fallen into a crevice or an abandoned mine shaft or fallen victim to some sort of other natural hazard. Some have even suggested he could have been felled by an attack from a wild animal. All these theories, though, are completely unproven, and given the extensive searches for him, it seems likely some trace of him would have been found. At present, the most likely theory remains that he came upon some bad men from south of the border. And this is the theory I personally think is most likely. While it isn't evidence, of course, I've read numerous accounts online about the inherent dangers in this area, due to it being a corridor for international crime. I suspect that someone with a bit of a maverick streak like Paul may have been more likely to intervene on his own in a situation where he ought to have called for backup. Or perhaps he saw a situation where he simply had to intervene, given that someone was facing the imminent and immediate threat of harm. Also, just as a quick aside, the Park Service treating him like a common criminal and coming after his likely widow really rubs me the wrong way. After all, this is a guy who very well could have given his life up heroically in the line of duty. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder that I also have a true crime channel and historical mysteries channel you can check out after you finish up this video. Also remember to hit like and subscribe, and also remember to ring the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Ray Gricar was a respected district attorney in Center County, Pennsylvania, known for his meticulous and ethical approach to justice. In April 2005, just months before his planned retirement, the 59-year-old prosecutor vanished without a trace. Nearly 20 years later, his disappearance remains one of Pennsylvania's most perplexing cold cases. On the morning of Friday, April 15, 2005, Ray Gricar decided to take a day off from work. He told his live-in girlfriend, Patty Fornicola, that he was going to enjoy the sunny weather with a drive to Lewisburg, a town about 50 miles east of his home in Bellefonte. Around 11:30 a.m., Gricar called Patty to say he was driving along Route 192 and enjoying the ride. He told her, "I love you," in what would be their last conversation. He promised to be home later that evening, but when Gricar did not return home that night, Patty became concerned. After several hours of unanswered calls, she called in to report him missing. Local police and state troopers were alerted that the district attorney had failed to come home, an alarming and out-of-character situation. The next day, April 16th, authorities launched an urgent search for Gricar and his distinctive vehicle. Police even used a helicopter to scan roadways from above, looking for any sign of an accident involving his red and white Mini Cooper. That afternoon, a state trooper spotted Grikar's Mini Cooper parked in a dirt parking lot on the outskirts of Lewisburg, near an antique mall known as the Street of Shops. The car was about 45 miles from Grikar's home, just as he had indicated to his girlfriend, and was situated not far from the banks of the Susquehanna River. Investigators noted that there were no obvious signs of foul play at the scene, and the vehicle was locked, with no damage to it whatsoever. However, some puzzling clues emerged. Grikar's cell phone was found inside the car, powered off and left behind on the seat. More strangely, ashes were discovered on the passenger side floor, and the car smelled of tobacco. This was immediately deemed unusual because Grikar was a non-smoker who actively disliked the smell of tobacco smoke and was unlikely to allow anyone to smoke in his car. The car keys were missing and have never been found, and Grikar's wallet was also not in the vehicle. In another strange twist, his work laptop, which he often carried around even on his days off, was nowhere to be seen either. Multiple people later reported seeing a man resembling Ray Grikar in Lewisburg on the day he vanished. Witnesses recalled Grikar browsing in the Street of Shops antique mall and strolling down Market Street in the early afternoon. One shop owner even claimed that Grikar had visited the mall, accompanied by an unknown dark-haired woman, appearing as if he was waiting for someone. This lead was never confirmed, and police found no evidence that Grikar was having an affair or meeting a secret contact. Aside from these anecdotal sightings, nothing seemed amiss in Lewisburg that day. It was as if the district attorney simply vanished into thin air, a sentiment Patty Fornicola, his girlfriend, would later echo throughout interviews. In the immediate aftermath of Grikar's disappearance, a massive investigation unfolded. Local law enforcement, joined by Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI, combed the area for clues. Search teams with canine units scoured the riverbanks and wooded areas, while dive teams plunged into the Susquehanna River, looking for any sign of the missing DA. Helicopters buzzed overhead to survey the surrounding countryside from above. Despite these exhaustive efforts, the searches in those first days turned up nothing. No trace of Grikar himself. Investigators were left with only the abandoned car and a handful of perplexing hints. Over the next few weeks, tips poured in from the public, and sightings were reported across multiple states. There was an unconfirmed sighting of a man matching Grikar's description in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, on April 18th, just a few days after he went missing. Still other reports from as far away as Texas and Illinois came in over the months that followed. One tipster even claimed to have seen Grikar in the audience of a taping of the Oprah Winfrey Show in Chicago. However, none of these leads could be substantiated. Police tracked down many of the sightings, only to determine that the individuals spotted were not Ray Grikar, or that the accounts were not credible. By early summer 2005, the case had grown cold, with Grikar's fate still completely unknown. As the investigation pressed on, a major break, or perhaps another mystery, emerged in July 2005. On July 30th of that year, over 3 months after Ray Grikar disappeared, 2 fishermen on the Susquehanna River made a startling discovery. They found a laptop computer submerged in the shallow water beneath a bridge outside Lewisburg. It was soon identified as Grikar's missing county-issued laptop. The device was found lodged against a bridge support under a highway bridge that spans the river between Lewisburg and the neighboring town of Milton. Notably, when divers retrieved the mud-caked laptop, its hard drive was missing. That is to say, the drive had been physically removed from the machine. Investigators scoured the area for the missing hard disk, and a few months later, a broken computer hard drive was recovered on the riverbank downstream. The hard drive proved to be the one belonging to Grikar's laptop. Unfortunately, it was badly damaged by water and silt, and forensic analysts were unable to recover any data from it. The fact that the hard drive was separated from the laptop, and apparently intentionally removed, raised many additional questions. It suggested that someone, perhaps Ray himself or an unknown party, had taken steps to destroy the computer and any information it contained before tossing it into the river. The discovery of the laptop spurred investigators to dig deeper into Ray's digital footprint. A search of the home computer at Ray's residence revealed troubling evidence that someone had researched how to destroy computer data. In the days or weeks prior to his disappearance, internet searches had been made for phrases like "how to wreck a hard drive" and "water damage to a notebook computer." In addition, records later indicated that Ray had purchased specialized data wiping software, presumably to overwrite the computer's hard drive contents. It appeared that either Ray or someone using his computer anticipated the need to damage or dispose of a hard drive. This revelation only deepened the mystery. Was Ray preparing to permanently erase sensitive information? And if so, what information and why? Or had an unknown perpetrator gained access to his home and done all this to cover their tracks? With the laptop and hard drive recovered, albeit yielding no readable data, physical evidence in the case essentially stalled. No other belongings of Grikar were ever found in the river. Notably, his wallet and car keys remained missing. Despite the lack of solid forensic evidence, investigators continued to pursue the case, but by 2006, however, leads were dwindling and years passed with no sign of Ray. In July 2011, after 6 years with no answers, Center County authorities took the step of declaring Ray legally deceased. This legal declaration provided closure on paper for estate and administrative purposes, but it didn't reflect an actual resolution of the investigation. Ray's body had not been found, and the case was far from closed in the eyes of law enforcement. The Pennsylvania State Police and other agencies have repeatedly affirmed that the case remains open and active. From the outset, the disappearance of Ray presented investigators with an unsettling question. What happened to a well-respected prosecutor in broad daylight, in a quiet Pennsylvania town? Over the years, several key theories have emerged, each examined by authorities. All are rooted in the peculiar evidence, or lack thereof, left behind. While speculation has run rampant in forums and media, investigators have tried to ground their conclusions in facts. One of the initial lines of inquiry was that Grikar might have chosen to leave the world on a voluntary basis. This theory arose in part because of an eerie family coincidence. In May 1996, Ray's older brother, Roy Grikar, disappeared in Ohio under similar circumstances. Roy told his wife he was going out to run an errand and never returned. A week later, Roy's body was found in the Great Miami River. It was ruled that he did it himself by jumping into the river. Given that parallel, it was reasonable for police to ask if Ray Grikar could have followed the same tragic path. Investigators did consider whether depression or personal pressures might have driven Ray to end his life in the Susquehanna River, which flows not far from where his car was found. However, they found no solid evidence that Grikar was suffering from mental health issues at the time. Friends and family described him as upbeat and excited about his upcoming retirement and future plans. In fact, Grikar and Patty Fornicola had been actively planning a cross-country road trip to celebrate his retirement. They even had specific plans to visit national parks and then spend time with Grikar's adult daughter in Washington state. Moreover, despite extensive searches, no body was ever recovered from the river or elsewhere. Police noted that if Grikar had jumped into the water, one might expect some trace, clothing, shoes, or ultimately a body, to turn up, but nothing ever did. To this day, there is no direct evidence that Ray Grikar perished this way, and authorities have not classified his case as such. Another theory claims that Ray chose to deliberately walk away and start a new life. Cases of high-profile individuals vanishing intentionally are rare but not unheard of. Some cite examples of officials or businessmen who faked their deaths to escape problems. In Ray's case, some have wondered if he might have been motivated to leave behind his identity due to undisclosed troubles or fears. Could he have staged the scene in Lewisburg, abandoning his car and destroying his laptop, to mislead investigators and then quietly slipped away? Investigators didn't dismiss this idea outright, especially given the evidence of the computer being wiped, an action that could fit with someone covering their tracks. They explored whether Ray had made any secret preparations for a getaway. The FBI assisted by examining Ray's financial records, looking for any signs of unusual transactions, hidden funds, or a stash of money that could finance a life on the run. However, despite the FBI's far-reaching investigative powers, they found nothing. There was no evidence that Griecar moved large sums of money or set up any secret accounts, and his bank accounts and credit cards saw no activity after April 2005. His passport was left at home, and there were no obvious withdrawals of cash prior to his disappearance. Taking on a completely new identity would also have required significant planning. By all accounts, Ray had not expressed a desire to leave, nor did he exhibit behavior consistent with someone preparing to vanish. Further, this would have meant giving up the significant pension from the job he was just about to retire from. Despite the lack of evidence, the authorities have never been able to specifically rule this out. The third, and perhaps most troubling theory, is that Ray Griecar met with foul play. If true, this would likely mean someone abducted or attacked him on April 15th and disposed of his body, making it look as if he simply walked away. There are several sub-theories within this category, all of which have been investigated by the authorities. One possibility is that Ray was the victim of a crime of opportunity or an encounter that turned violent. Perhaps he met a stranger, or even the unidentified woman some witnesses noted, in Lewisburg, and things took a deadly turn. The presence of cigarette ash in his car raised the question of whether someone else was in the vehicle with him that day. Could Ray have given a ride to a stranger, or met someone who then overpowered him? However, the car itself showed no signs of struggle, making an attack in the vehicle less likely. If an altercation happened elsewhere, no witnesses reported any disturbance. The lack of any obvious motive for a random person to target a small-town DA in broad daylight has kept this line of thought speculative. Given Ray's role as a prosecutor, investigators naturally examined whether someone he had put behind bars sought revenge. During his 20-year career as DA, Griecar handled many serious cases and likely angered more than a few dangerous individuals. Early in the investigation, police ran through Ray's recent case list to see if any defendants or convicts had made threats or stood out as suspicious. They also looked at older cases that might connect. One notable angle was Griecar's involvement in prosecuting members of a motorcycle gang. In 2003, he had overseen a case against a Hells Angels smuggling ring, which led some to wonder if gang members might have sought retaliation. However, investigators consider this theory highly unlikely, given that organized crime tends to view prosecutors themselves as simple cogs in a machine. A widely discussed theory in the public realm centers on Ray's decision in 1998 not to prosecute Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky. If you're fortunate enough to be unfamiliar with Jerry Sandusky, let's just say he is the worst sort of human being imaginable and won't see the light of day for the rest of his life. In 1998, Ray had reviewed a complaint against Sandusky, but declined to press charges. After Sandusky's crimes came to light, the coincidence that Ray had vanished in 2005 led to rampant speculation. Some theorists claim that Ray might have been silenced by individuals who wanted to cover up the scandal, or conversely, that an ashamed Ray might have disappeared due to regret. Still, another theory suggests that perhaps a parent sought revenge for Ray's refusal to prosecute Sandusky. However, law enforcement agencies directly involved in Ray's case have consistently found no evidence linking his disappearance to the Sandusky matter. In absence of any real evidence, the Sandusky theory remains entirely in the realm of conjecture. Based on the evidence as it stands, it seems to me that the theory that he orchestrated his own demise is the most likely to be true. The fact that he disappeared under circumstances that were eerily similar to that of his brother is one point in favor of this. Further, the internet searches on how to destroy evidence were presumptively his searches until proven otherwise. While I will admit that someone could have broken in and placed these searches on his computer prior to his disappearance, there was no evidence of a break-in whatsoever. I'd also like to add that if this was part of a broader conspiracy, I suspect someone who broke in would have placed much more direct search queries, if you catch my drift. Further, I suspect that Ray Grikar, being a prosecutor, would be more attuned to operational security than the average person. I also find the fact that he was about to retire potentially a significant point in favor of this theory. Ray Grikar was a man who was known to take his work laptop with him on his off days. He had a job that many people strive for and dream about, and this was all coming to an end. It's possible that this caused him more mental anguish than he let on to his friends and family members. And of course, it's necessary to say that just because someone appears happy to their friends and family doesn't necessarily mean much. After all, nobody knows exactly what a person is feeling inside their own head. On the morning of October 29, 2004, a shocking scene unfolded at Wembley Point, a 21-story triangular office tower in northwest London. Office workers arriving for the day watched in horror as a young woman in the top-floor cafeteria suddenly climbed onto a table, opened a window, and leapt out. Her body was recovered shortly after 9 a.m. from the shallow River Brent at the base of the tower. Police quickly determined that the woman had fallen from the 21st floor and that her death was voluntary, with no immediate evidence of foul play. Yet in the aftermath, one perplexing fact would haunt investigators. Nobody knew who this well-dressed tragic jumper was. The unidentified woman appeared to be between 20 and 40 years old, of either African or Afro-Caribbean descent, and stood around 5'3". Witnesses described her as petite and well-groomed, wearing layers of neat clothing on that brisk autumn morning. She wore a maroon zip-up bomber jacket over a crew-neck sweater and a thin black turtleneck, along with black pants, tights, and a pair of black Skechers shoes. On her fingers she had two distinctive rings, one shaped like a cowrie shell, and a simple silver watch on her wrist. Investigators found no identification on the woman's body. No wallet, no phone, no cards or keys. This absence of ID, combined with the traumatic manner of death, posed an immediate challenge. Metropolitan police officers treated the case as a non-suspicious death, which unfortunately meant fewer resources were devoted to uncovering her identity. Officers recorded the basics, documenting the woman's description, her fingerprints and DNA, in hopes she would perhaps be easy to identify. Early on, they also checked missing persons reports for anyone of her description. But in 2004, with limited DNA technology and no immediate matches in police databases, those efforts yielded nothing conclusive. With no obvious signs of a crime, the investigation stalled quickly. The mystery woman's few possessions provided tantalizing clues, but also deepened the puzzle. On the table in the 21st floor cafe where she had sat, she left an assortment of items, some usual, but one highly unusual. Those items were 5 pounds in cash, an empty 10-pack of Marlboros, a black plastic bag, a Guardian newspaper, and most strikingly, a 2-foot by 1-foot oil painting. If you're just listening, I put the painting up on the screen now, and it looks a bit unusual and even slightly creepy to my eyes. That said, I'm not sure if that's because I knew the context of when and where it was found prior to seeing it, but I'll come back to this painting in a moment. Not a single item on the table bore her name or any personal detail. The 7-day bus pass found among her things proved to be one of the most significant pieces of evidence. It had been issued just 3 days earlier, on Tuesday, October 26, 2004, at 7:07 a.m., from a ticket vendor on Seven Sisters Road in North London. This suggested she had traveled roughly 10 miles across the city, heading from the Seven Sisters area to Wembley, possibly as part of a regular route she took. The pass still had 2 days remaining on it, potentially implying she originally intended to continue using it through the end of that week. The oil painting left at her cafe table was perhaps the strangest clue of all. Described as a mostly abstract scene with bold, tribal-style patterns, the artwork depicts what look like dancing or falling figures and a large, blank, white, faceless shape in the center. Hauntingly, it's as if the painting itself symbolizes an unknown identity. Police circulated images of the distinctive painting, hoping someone might recognize it. Some speculated it was created by the woman herself or came from a local artist, but its origin remains unknown. The presence of the painting led to much speculation. Why would someone intent on ending herself carry a canvas with her to an office tower? One theory was that Wembley Point occasionally hosted art exhibitions, so maybe she was an artist familiar with the venue. This possibility, while unconfirmed, could explain how she knew there was a cafe on the top floor open to the public. Indeed, co-workers in the building noted that the 21st floor restaurant wasn't widely advertised outside, yet the woman found her way there with apparent ease. Witness accounts from that morning added a few more details about the woman's final moments. 2 people who rode the elevator with her up to the 21st floor recalled that she looked intensely distressed. One even tried to lighten the mood by saying something like, "Cheer up, love. It might never happen," as they ascended. But the woman remained silent and miserable. In the cafe, she bought a coffee and smoked a cigarette quietly by a window, leafing through that day's Guardian newspaper. Nothing about her behavior overtly drew alarm, until the very moment she jumped. The suddenness of her act left bystanders in shock. One cafe patron, only feet away, later described seeing the window left ajar and the woman simply gone in an instant. Those who witnessed the tragedy did not recognize the woman as a colleague or friend. In the hours and days following the death, no immediate leads emerged. No missing person report matching her description was filed, either before or after October 29, 2004. This led people to start asking hard questions about what had happened. How could a woman seemingly in her 20s or 30s, with a job, as implied by her attire and bus pass, and presumably acquaintances, vanish from life without anyone reporting her missing? The lack of an ID and the absence of obvious family or friends coming forward meant the case quickly went cold. After a coroner's inquest confirmed the cause of death as self-inflicted by jumping, the unknown woman was eventually laid to rest with only a number marking her grave. For over a decade, the Wembley Point woman case saw little public progress. However, the mystery was never completely forgotten. Occasional media stories appeared about unidentified people, and this young woman's death in a busy London office tower stood out as particularly baffling. Around 2018, a team of volunteer investigators and a charity called Locate International took a special interest in the case. These volunteers, including former police, researchers, and concerned citizens, began re-examining the evidence with fresh eyes. They combed through records, scoured the internet for any mention of a missing person fitting the woman's profile, and even tracked down former Wembley Point workers to interview. More significant developments finally began to emerge in the early 2020s. In July 2021, an appeal was launched, focusing on the mysterious oil painting. Locate International and police publicized the painting's image to art communities, hoping an artist or gallery might recognize its style. Then in October 2022, around the 18th anniversary of the death, London media picked up the story once again. A new lifelike composite image of the Wembley Point woman was released to the public, showing a young black woman with short dark hair and a calm expression. In late 2024, 2 decades after the woman's death, investigators revealed new information that had surfaced, accompanied by another public appeal. According to Locate International, a witness came forward to report a crucial conversation. This man claimed that about 2 weeks before the incident, he had met a woman matching the Wembley Point woman's description near the office building and chatted with her. She appeared deeply upset and confided that she was distraught over her boyfriend's health problems, implying she was caring for a partner who was seriously ill. If true, it indicates the woman had a personal relationship and perhaps a caregiver role, suggesting there may be a boyfriend, or his family, out there who knew her. Authorities have appealed for that unknown boyfriend, or anyone who might recall a friend's ill partner around 2004, to step forward. Another line of speculation focuses on the woman's background and community ties. Public tips have repeatedly suggested she might have been connected to community or arts centers around the Seven Sisters neighborhood. One tip mentioned the Chestnuts Community Center, which in the early 2000s hosted programs for West African immigrants and asylum seekers. The idea, which remains unverified, is that she could have been an asylum seeker from West Africa who had relatively few contacts in London. This theory might also account for why loved ones abroad wouldn't know where to begin looking if she went missing in the UK. Similarly, the cowrie shell ring she wore is a style often associated with femininity and fertility in some African cultures. This has led to speculation that she may have faced personal challenges, like a longing for children, or that she may have lost a child. At the end of the day, though, everything with this unknown woman remains almost entirely speculative. Given the distinct painting she was found with, I suspect the best chance of identifying her is if someone comes forward who recognizes the painting. This may be the one break in the case required for all the other evidence to fall into place and for the case to be solved. Alternatively, there's also the possibility of familial DNA technology being used to connect her to her relatives. However, if she was a West African asylum seeker with no family in the UK, this vastly reduces the chances of this being an effective investigative method at present. In the hills of Appalachia lurks a mystery older than the United States itself, an enigmatic group known as the Moon-Eyed People. According to Cherokee folklore, these peculiar beings inhabited the Appalachian Mountains long before Europeans set foot on the continent. They've been described as pale-skinned nocturnal humans who live underground and who have eyes so sensitive they couldn't bear daylight. But who were they really? Theories vary from ancient Welsh explorers, a forgotten indigenous civilization, to more esoteric claims. The legend of the Moon-Eyed People first emerged through Cherokee oral tradition and reached early settler ears by the 18th century. One of the earliest written accounts dates to 1797, when Benjamin Smith Barton, a scientist, attempted to document these oral traditions. He reported an unusual Cherokee story describing a strange people already living in the area when they arrived. These moon-eyed inhabitants, unable to see clearly by day, were eventually driven away by the Cherokee, who claimed their land. Another striking account came from Cherokee Chief Oconostota, documented by Tennessee's first governor, John Sevier, in 1782. Now, notably, I should mention that John Sevier generally had hostile relations with the Cherokee and led troops in numerous battles against Cherokee forces. That is to say, he may have been an unreliable narrator, and he may have had alternative reasons for attributing the following to this Cherokee chief. Oconostota vividly described mysterious quote-unquote white people who crossed the ocean long before Europeans officially arrived, leaving behind impressive stone structures. According to this narrative, the Cherokee strategically ambushed the Moon-Eyed people during a bright full moon when they couldn't properly see, and eliminated them. Modern theorists have suggested that this early recording of this oral tradition may have been twisted to suit the needs of those who wished to conquer the Cherokee and take their land. Evidence for this is circumstantial. However, it portrays the Cherokee as people who conquered the land from people who sound like they could conceivably be European descendants. Accordingly, this may have been used to shore up the idea that the land wasn't rightfully property of the Cherokee. This effectively reframes the narrative of conquest into the much more palatable idea of a reconquest of rightful lands. Over centuries, speculation about the Moon-Eyed people's identity has inspired a variety of theories. The most interesting theory points to medieval Welsh explorers led by Prince Madoc, who allegedly sailed to America around 1170, centuries before Columbus. Legends persist of blue-eyed Native Americans speaking an unintelligible tongue, fueling claims that the Moon-Eyed people were descendants of these lost colonists. At Georgia's Fort Mountain State Park, a plaque proudly attributes an ancient stone wall to Madoc's followers. To some, this has cemented the Welsh narrative, despite the lack of solid archaeological evidence. Others have speculated they're the descendants of Norse colonists from Vinland or Greenland. Despite the Norse actually having been in America prior to Columbus, this theory hasn't attracted much attention. A more historically grounded theory suggests the Moon-Eyed people were remnants of earlier indigenous cultures, such as the Adena or Hopewell mound builders. Cherokee stories might reflect real memories of encountering ancient civilizations that had previously inhabited Appalachia, constructing mounds and stone forts. Over generations, these encounters evolved into mythic tales of fair-skinned predecessors. Some have speculated that this element, where the Moon-Eyed people are described as looking vaguely European, developed after their arrival on the continent. Interestingly, according to this theory, the Cherokee may have heard about Europeans long prior to actually meeting any, and worked their appearance into a pre-existing myth. Another theory is that the Cherokee references to Moon-Eyed people described early European miners, quote-unquote, living underground and emerging primarily at night. And when you think about it for a moment, it actually makes a lot of sense. Seeing hunched-over people with unfamiliar hair, eye and skin colors emerging from the ground at dusk may have been the genesis of this legend. These individuals would have also needed some time to adjust to normal light after a day down in the mine, contributing to the idea that their eyes couldn't handle natural light.